Whatever happened to that trench coat kid in your school? In middle school during lunch hour, we would have gym teachers monitoring the cafeteria and selecting tables to go get in line to get lunch. Students would come from class, sit at their respective table, and wait for their table to be chosen. One of the gym teachers was a power-thirsty dickhead and would purposefully skip an entire table of students and select the next one, just because he didn't like one of the students that happened to be sitting at that table. Finally, one day our resident trench coat kid freaked out, stood on the lunch table, and began berating the teacher using every insult he could muster up in his infinite rage. After his rant, he grabbed a full lunch tray from another student and threw it at the teacher. He then bolted through the double doors that led to the front lawn of the campus and took off down the street. Literally never saw him again. A couple years ago I was dating a girl I went to high school with. This was like 10 years after we graduated. We had a cooking class together with this trenchy kid named Rise. He was nice, and we got along with him. We were wondering how he was doing, and looked him up on Google. He pulled a gun on a cop and got killed, so he wasn't doing great. Around May, he shaved almost all his hair off, threw away his trench coat, and replaced it with a leather jacket. He did so because people kept joking that he was gonna shoot up the school, and no matter how much he denied it, school administrators were beginning to take it seriously. He tried to make money by setting up a bike chop shop. Then he tried to make money by creating an underground cockfighting league. Then he tried to make money by buying and selling cars at auctions. He actually made some money this time and managed to fund himself through university. Halfway through his parents won the lottery. The dad tried to take the money and run, but he was stopped and the assets frozen. Trench coat kid graduate / dropped out of university, who even knows, and tries to get some of the lottery money himself. He didn't get any because his family all seemed to hate each other. He then sold everything he had and drove to Mongolia from the UK, where his car broke down. He crashed on some random guy's couch for a few weeks before he managed to sell what remained of his car and buy a motorbike. He then rode it to China. He got a job teaching English in a couple of days. Apparently the demand is huge for native speakers. He got fired after a few months. No idea why. He now sells electric bikes to expats in China. Through 2 years in elementary I shared teachers with him. He had been ridiculed enough to know that it was best to just be quiet, but I don't believe I ever witnessed him be physically bullied. When nobody would partner with him for our 5th grade science fair, I ended up with him as my partner. We had to pick a project, and we had to work on it outside of school. I asked him if I could come to his house, since it was on the way to mine after school. He told me that he wasn't allowed to have people over, so that we'd have to go to the library. For the most part he wasn't terrible to work with once I got used to the smell. We got our project done, and as I recall we got an A, and after that we became friendly, I guess you would call it. Actually being his friend would have been social suicide, but I did walk the same way home as him, so we'd have a few minutes to chat after school, and this continued for the rest of 5th grade. Middle school was so much bigger that I didn't really have much reason to interact with him. The school had 2 separate lunches, and with mine being later I would watch him feed his entire lunch to seagulls from my language arts class in 6th grade. People began calling him Bird Boy, and there were more than a few times when I saw him get picked on. A lot of those same bullies picked on me, so I wasn't in a position to help. It just felt like part of middle school life. In 8th grade he started wearing Confederate Army costumes, for lack of a better description, and had the Confederate flag sewn onto his backpack. It was the first time I had seen it outside of Dukes of Hazzard reruns. The good news was that by the time middle school was over in 1994 he had found what were either friends or just a group of individuals who shared in the misery of being completely alienated. I didn't know the term emo back then, but they were non-affectionately referred to as the crap pack. High school was upon us, and it was the blending of the 4 local middle schools. It was a great opportunity to start over, and I took advantage of it. I was actually one of the cool kids after growing into my ears and face over the summer, and for the first time since kindergarten I looked forward to going to school. The only crossover I had with this kid was that we were both in drama club. I think he joined drama and FFA just to be ironic. While participating in drama club he never seemed to really focus and just talked about how much he loved his great leader Satan. Any kind of improv we would do would just end with him in his trench coat, grabbing his wrist as if to keep his hand from attacking his face. It never stopped. Being uncomfortable listening to him grunt and struggle against himself, always collapsing into a pile of trench coat as the seemingly demonic hand eventually had its way with his face to a smattering of supportive applause from the rest of the class. With his new emo crew he was mostly left alone. It probably didn't hurt that he had also grown to be around 6 feet 2 and weighed 250 pounds at least. That was until he got caught sodomizing a goat in the FFA bar junior year. The school administrators gave a half attempted to cover it up for him, but it was a student who found him, and she told everyone. After that he just sort of disappeared until halfway through senior year. No idea where he went, or why the hell he came back, but he did, and he was tormented daily. I even got involved in it, and ended up getting suspended for a week, after nailing him in the face with a snowball, before and after saying his name. No. Not until you take a shower in my best goat impression. Shortly after this he was investigated for molesting a young male cousin, and I never saw him again. A few years later he was convicted of raping and murdering a 7-year-old boy, and is currently serving life in prison. Throwaway time. I was the trench coat kid at my high school. I was super creative, and really into fantasy horror. At one point I was drawing my own graphic novel about werewolves taking over a high school. I'm old and this was before Twilight. It was social commentary and meant to be funny, but this was circa Columbine and my principal had the biggest savior complex I've ever seen out in the wild. After getting her paws on that FBI school shooter profile, she decided that I was an imminent threat and harassed me relentlessly. I became so afraid that I'd be blamed in the event of a bombing or attack that I developed horrible insomnia and felt terrified to come to school. The high school I went to was in North Dakota. North Dakotans, more than any other Midwesterners, have this uniquely insane ability to seem like really nice, warm people while also being as insular and xenophobic and hostile to differentness as possible. I was new, I was different, and that was not okay. Keep in mind that I was quiet as fuck and spent all my free time either in the library, writing stories, or in the art room, making comics. The other kids were fucking one another and getting pregnant, doing drugs, driving drunk, bragging about poaching deer, and worse. Yet I was the problem, and the principal actually called a meeting at one point to try and get me expelled for my disturbing art and writing. Werewolves, people. My mom pretty well flipped her shit at that point and demanded to know why the school was harassing her kid when I was just putting stuff on paper and not acting on it like so many other kids were doing right under her nose. My mom pretty well shut that principal down, and she left me alone after that. I could not have been luckier to have my mom as my mom. As soon as I got out of there, my life improved so much for the better, especially when I went to college. The things people singled me out for abuse and harassment for in high school suddenly made me okay, almost cool. I got my B, A, and my M, F, A, and now I make a pretty decent living doing what I love. I still love me some werewolves, and recently got paid almost $1K for a painting of one I did. I'm also an attractive professional looking woman, and you would never ever guess that I was the trench coat kid. He had a really long and unkempt mullet with a scum stash, and I swear to God he couldn't turn left. He would spin all the way around to the right. He also refused to take the stairs when he could. Instead, he would climb the walls and railings, which earned him the nickname Spider Mullet Man from me. Not sure what became of him. There was a guy at my HS by the nickname of Grungy, had a mohawk, went across the street to smoke his cigarettes, mumbled most of what he spoke to anybody if that. I didn't really interact with him at all, but when I was older I met a guy who asked what HS I went to. When I told him, he asked, "Did you know Grungy?" I told him I knew of him, but that was it. Apparently they were really good friends, but Grungy died of some heart condition a year ago or so before that. From the stories he told me about him, he was a pretty nice guy. I was the kid who wanted a trench coat, but couldn't find one at Goodwill, only place I could get my clothes, so I got the closest thing I could find. Like a big black denim coat with tons and tons of pockets. I would keep a little book of Poe's poems in one pocket and an H.P. Lovecraft book in another. I normaled up in high school, made a bunch of friends, started going to church, saw a lot of the world, came home, got married, and had a baby. There was this kid in my high school, dad committed suicide, so he was never really right. He was the kid that would go 0 to 100 real quick if you said the wrong thing, so having even a casual conversation with him was always pretty nerve-wracking. Someone joked about his dad without knowing about it, and he literally fought off to security guards twice his size in rage. He also blocked a door to keep his class from leaving with a knife after the class bell rang, because no one remembered/knew it was his birthday. Anyway, one of our friends accidentally found him on social media a few years after we graduated. He goes by a different name now, and is a she, long hair, dress and all in the photos. Don't really know much more than that, but it was definitely a weird experience seeing that. I was actually friends with Trenchcoat Kid, whose nickname was Trenchcoat. Insert his real first name here. His future seemed uncertain back then. He used to make his own LSD, apparently something he believed was LSA. One time he drank a whole bottle of his homemade hallucinogen, and ended up wandering around the city for a few weeks, and ended up in a psych ward for a while. I have to say though, one of the kindest and most genuine people I've ever met. He really helped me out during a tough time, and was the only guy during that time to offer to help me without also sexually harassing me. I stopped hanging out with him because one day he admitted to me that he's a necrophiliac, which was weird, but whatever. Then the next day he said something along the lines of "to hell with my fantasies, let's get together and make our own." So I told him I would call him back and never did. Surprisingly enough, he's in medical school now to be a doctor. Not sure if it's for a genuine interest in medicine or just the access to fresh cadavers. He's also very creative and is making music. This was pre-Columbine, but there was this weird kid in our very small private high school, 400 kids total. I believe he was autistic, but I had no exposure to him. We were using the track system, which kept all of us very stuck in the same 20 people groups, so I didn't have any classes with him. I was a scholarship kid on the app track. I think he was on the slow track. My best friend, middle track, may have had some classes with him. Every single day at lunch she would put her things down at our table then go talk to him. He sat alone, behind us. One day I asked her, "Why do you have these daily conversations with him?" She said, "See that paper in his hands? It is a hit list. And I'm determined not to be on it." Didn't take it seriously. Now I wonder, was he really planning something? And what happened to him? My heart breaks for him, but I also wonder if he ever did anything. Not at school, but maybe later in real life. Wish I could remember his last name. He got in huge trouble with the librarian. He checked out a large book, one of those look at the inside of planes/ships type encyclopedia, very oversized. He would read it every day on the bus. Not that weird, especially since he was the weird kid. Turns out he was using the large book so he could read Playboy on the bus every day. They found out because he left the magazine in when he returned it. He got suspended and ended up changing schools. Unrelated, his parents needed to move for work.